Hello viewers, in this video I'm going to be going over carburetors. I have one that I'm going to take apart and explain on the bench, and then at the end I have an old Sears garden tractor that I believe has a carburetor problem, so we'll take that off and clean it out and see if that fixes it. So this is a Holley 4-barrel carburetor. It's a very common one. The number on it is 3310. If you're looking at Holley's, you can find the number stamped up in here and be able to search it on the internet to figure out exactly what it is. So this is a 750 CFM 4-barrel carburetor with a vacuum secondaries. Obviously there's a lot of different variants. You can have 4 barrels like this for more performance. A lot of cars from like the 80s that just had like 2 barrels, and like lawnmowers and stuff might just have 1. It's pretty common. So most carburetors, or pretty much all carburetors, have very similar operation. There might be some differences, but they basically all work the same kind of. So if you can do one, you should be able to do many. So first thing I'll talk about is a mechanical versus vacuum secondaries. So basically, when you hit the throttle with this kind of a carburetor, you're only working the primary barrels here. So you're only working these with your foot. The secondaries here are actually operated by a vacuum diaphragm, and so they open more slowly and gradually when you're flooring it, based off engine vacuum. And on Holley's, that is adjustable. So you can take this cap off, and inside you will find some old parts for this here. This is what the diaphragm looks like, and then here's the metal rod that moves the linkage to open the blades. And if you want to adjust how quickly the secondaries open, or you can buy a spring kit like this, and it has all these springs in here that are different weights to control the opening of those secondaries. And so if you have what's called mechanical secondaries, or a lot of people might refer to those as a double pumper, that means that when you floor it, the secondaries here are opened mechanically. So they're opened with your foot. So as soon as you floor it, give it full throttle, all 4 will open. And the reason why sometimes that's referred to as a double pumper is because of the accelerator pump. It'll have one that squirts in the primaries and the secondaries, because the main reason for the accelerator pump here, when you pump the gas, it squirts fuel, which a lot of times, if you hear people have to pump their car a couple times before it'll start, that's because they're pumping the throttle, which works this pump, which then squirts fuel into the intake to help it start. And the main reason for that is the accelerator pump is when you floor it and these blades open abruptly, you will get a lean condition if it's just wide open. So that accelerator pump squirts fuel to combat that, because then you would get like a pretty good hesitation when you went to floor it. So now if you open the secondaries abruptly without a squirter or accelerator pump, the same thing will happen. You'll get a hesitation when these fly open. So you need another squirter to help with that. And most most cars or just regular old carburetors do have vacuum secondaries. The double pumper or mechanical secondary style carburetor is a more racy carburetor, but you can see this body here has a spot for another pump to go, although it doesn't look like there's any holes or anything. So one last thing about the pump, how it works is it's not exactly you got this plastic lever here on this one, which it's not put together properly right now, but anyway, it rides on a cam on the throttle right here. So when you move the throttle, I don't know if you can see, it works this lever here, which then in turn pushes down on this lever, which then pumps the accelerator pump. So moving on to some of the first adjustments you can do. Usually on a carburetor for a car, the only real mixture screw that you can tune with a screwdriver is going to be your idle mixture. Now on this carburetor, you got one here and then one on the other side, so it's got one for each barrel. And then you can take a screwdriver and tune in how it idles. And the reason why, so that's a separate circuit, because when you're idling, your throttle blades are closed. So you're not going to be using your main circuit up here for fuel. You're just going to be, it's going to be sucking fuel through little holes underneath the throttle blade. See if you can see in there, two little holes. That's where the fuel's going to come in when you're idling. And then when you get on it, there'll be an idle transfer circuit, and then you'll be on the main circuits in there, so you'll be using the fuel coming from the main jets and stuff. One last component on the carburetor that I can show before we take the float bowl off is the choke. Obviously that just really enriches the fuel mixture by not letting any gas or air in, and you know, that helps with cold starts or running while it's cold. This one here has a mechanical choke. Most cars from factory usually had like an electrical device on here that would slowly open the choke as it got warmed up. And then so usually you would the choke would be open, you'd pump the gas one time, that would set the choke, and then it was up to that I think it was like some sort of heat coil thing that would, as it got hot, it would slowly open the choke back up. So that's how that works. Alright, now I'm going to, so this particular carburetor has two float bowls on it for the primary and secondary circuit, and they both get their own fuel supply. So I have the fuel lines for it here. So this would go up here like that, and then the fuel would come in and they'd go to both. So in the secondary circuit, there's just a metering block back there that has a certain value, and that's all that's going on. So you can change that when you're tuning your carburetor, but most of the good stuff's going on in the primary circuit. So we will take the front primary fuel bowl off, and we'll look inside there and we'll go over the nitty-gritty. Take these. Now that's why a lot of people like Holleys for like drag racing and stuff like that, is because you don't have to take the carburetor off the car in order to change stuff around in it, and it's very easy to set up because you can just do what I'm doing here with the car on, with the carburetor on the car, and then you pop this off, and then there you go. There's all your jets and stuff you can change out. So that makes these really handy for that. So here's the fuel bowl and here's the float. The purpose of this is to regulate how much fuel is in this float, because you don't want it to be full to the brim and you don't want it to be empty. You want it to be, you know, somewhere in between, depending on what the particular carburetor wants. And this one does have an adjustable float, so you could turn this screw here in and out, and that would adjust the float height. But I believe a rebuild kit usually comes with like a measuring, see that thing here. I believe when I originally did this, it's been a while, but I use that to measure the float height, to set it like that. But it does have a little window here, so you can take the screw out, and then I imagine you would set your fuel level to the bottom of this sight on the side. But yeah, so there's an inlet needle in there, and it's just a basically an on-off valve. So as the fuel comes in, this goes up, shuts the gas off. As the car uses more gas, it sinks, and then it lets more fuel in, and it's the regulator. So a lot of times if you ever see somebody like tapping on the side of the carburetor, it's usually because these floats will get stuck sometimes, and if it gets stuck while it's up here, then it won't let any fuel in and the car won't start. If it gets stuck while it's down here, then it'll let in too much fuel, and then you'll start having like gas pouring out of it. So you'll see people hitting this to jar it a little bit to unstick the float. So that's what's going on with that. Now inside here is where you have your, let's zoom in on this a little bit. Inside here is where you have your main jets, right here. And then something that's kind of particular to this style of carburetor, a power valve. So basically, when you're at part throttle cruising down the highway, you know, at 1/3 to half throttle, you're getting the fuel from these main jets here, and then when you floor it, the power valve will open and allow in even more fuel. So that's how it's like, you know, there's several circuits. We're just covering the main ones, but you know, it's how it variates how much fuel depending on the situation. So, you know, when you're idling, you're just getting a little bit through this circuit under here. When you're cruising, you're getting more through the main jets. When you're flooring it, you're getting even more because the power valve's open. Now, I have a power valve right here. So this power valve is operated by vacuum. So when you have a lot of vacuum, engine vacuum, it's closed because you have the most engine vacuum at like idle, or when the engine's running with little load on it. Because when you're not using much power, these are more shut, and that's creating a vacuum in the manifold. And then when you're flooring it, these are wide open, and the pressure from the manifold and the pressure in the atmosphere equalizes and goes to basically no vacuum, if that makes sense. So these have different values and when they open. So if you get like an aftermarket one, it should have a little number stamped in it up here saying like 9 or 6. That's when it opens. So if you ever hooked up a vacuum gauge to your car and watched it, you notice the vacuum goes down the more throttle you give it and the more load the engine's under. So if this one's set to open at 9 inches of vacuum, then when your car's idling at around 19 or 20, it's closed. Once you start feeding it more throttle, like going up a hill, once that gets below 9, then this will open and start giving even more fuel to the engine. And that's how most of them work, and you can tune this so you can put one that opens later or earlier. I believe they even make like a 2-stage where it'll open a little bit at a certain vacuum and then open more or all the way at another. And so that's kind of particular to Holley style carburetors or motorcraft carburetors, because motorcrafts are very similar to this. So if you have like a Ford, I know the Motorcraft 2100 is popular amongst people to put on their own old Jeep Wranglers because they work good at angles. Now, a different kind of carburetor that is a little bit more what I see of usually have metering rods. So this here, get the shot. This is a metering rod from a Mikuni carburetor for a 4-wheeler, but it'll work for the purpose of showing this. So usually this is hung off of some brackets or levers that hold this actually inside one of the main jets, just like this. And as you give the car more throttle, zoom in on that. As you give the car more throttle, it'll slowly be lifted out of the jet, which allows more and more fuel to go through it. And as you can see, this is tapered, so it goes down to a fine point and gets wider as it goes up. So at idle, this will be pretty much all the way in the hole, and as you give it more throttle, open it up a little by coming out, and so on until you're flooring it and it's all the way out altogether. That's how like a Mikuni works. That's how like a Quadrajet from a GM car works. Elderbrock Performer, which is what I have on my car now, that's how that works. So that's very common for that. So there you go. That's like the basic rundown of how carburetors work. And on a lawnmower such as that, you usually have your idle mixture circuit and a jet, and sometimes at the bottom of the fuel bowl you'll have a main mixture screw, which and this carburetor I'm working has all those things. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the float bowl off of it. I'm going to shoot brake cleaner through this hole to make sure there's nothing clogged up in the fuel inlet circuit. Shoot some fuel through the main jets to make sure there's nothing clogged up in there, and then take the idle screw out and shoot some fuel through there. It's not going to have usually carburetors for lawnmowers don't have any kind of extra power valve or metering rods. They're just kind of set to run it 3600 RPMs all day. So you just kind of tune them to run at that RPM good, because that's pretty much all they do. They don't really need all the extra stuff to help regulate the fuel, and they usually don't have accelerator pumps either. That's more pretty much just on carburetors for cars. So I'm gonna get to working on the lawnmower now after I put this back together. So here's my Sears Custom 7. Has a 7 horsepower Kohler engine, and I bought this late in summer. I mowed the grass with it once, and then it was running pretty good, and then next time I went to go use it, it would just it only run with the choke on. Alright, I thought it'd be a bit easier to just leave the carburetor on so I don't risk ripping any gaskets for the carburetor, taking it off. Since all I was really planning on doing was taking the fuel bowl off, kind of like on that carburetor on the bench, and just spraying out the jets and stuff, usually that does the trick. So take this little air filter off here. screws. That looks reasonable condition. This doesn't have an accelerator pump or anything, but it does have an idle, mixture screw, main jet, a float, the float inlet needle. So I mean, a lot of it's the same. So now I'm going to take off the fuel bowl right here, and hopefully the little seal doesn't rip or anything when I do that. Okay. It says a little rubber seal on it. Looks intact still. It's inside the fuel bowl. Don't look too dirty or anything. Looks fairly alright. Alright, so here's the little float. So obviously that should be closed. That should be letting fuel in. It should not be. And underneath, right up through there, is where the jet's gonna be. So you can see that little brass jet up there. So basically all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna spray some fuel through here and make sure that the fuel inlet is clear. And then I'll shoot some fuel up, or some brake cleaner up through there, and watch to make sure it's coming through. And should be about it. There's also the idle screw there for idle. I could pull that out right there and then shoot some brake cleaner through there, and then I bet you this carburetor will work just fine again. Before I take the idle mixture screw out, I'm going to screw it in all the way to see how far it is out. So we got three-quarters of a turn. It was out three-quarters of a turn, so I'm going to clean out around the area first so I don't just put a bunch of grease in that hole. So now that I did that, I know how far out I need to reset it. So there's the needle for adjusting that. So I'm just going to go ahead and spray through this hole. Wait a minute. Appears to be a little brass washer in there. Now, if I didn't see that just now and I sprayed brake cleaner through, I would have blasted this little washer across the shop and never found it. So, you know, you got to pay attention to that kind of thing. You know, blast little pieces and then you can't find it, and then you won't know that was even supposed to be there. a couple easy pulls to make sure I didn't flood it out with brake cleaner.